Hello everyone, my name is Roke here, and as we steadily approach the War Within, I am left with a few questions. How will things pan out? Is anything going to be that different? And how does this tie into this huge saga? Well, hold on. To answer those questions, we have to take a step back and think about what's coming. In the last video, we took a dive into the ups and downs of Dragonflight, and I want to take a moment here to look forward to the War Within, which is the start of our next exhilarating adventure in Azeroth. Everything I'm going to talk about in this video is purely what I'd like to see, and does feed some off of the experiences I've had throughout the alpha and beta cycle as well. So far, the War Within is shaping up to be something great, but as with every new release of WoW, there are some things that I think could be improved upon throughout launch. I also want to take a moment to thank all of you that watched the previous video and commented on it. It means a lot to me as somebody starting out in this field of content creation, and I sincerely hope you all enjoy this one as well. So sit back, grab a snack, and let's dive into a bit of a prospective on how I think the War Within should aim to go even farther than before. We're going to follow the same pattern as in the last video, so we're going to start with some side stories. One notable thing I'd like to drop in here is that from my experience, the War Within might have too many side quests. While I feel Dragonflight has a plethora of fleshed out stories, the War Within seems to have taken the feedback from that and just made a large focus on having as many of these as possible. The leveling campaign itself seems to take a hit as a result, and instead you are left with these zones that are flooded with minor side quest chains that ultimately hold no value aside from one or two that set up plot points or tell a meaningful story. I'm not going to mention what they are, as this is meant to be a speculative video and not whole spoilers. My advice for the War Within here would be to focus more on its campaign, and take the winning points from the side stories in Dragonflight, and find a way to incorporate that into the main stories of the War Within a bit more. Other than that though, the stories themselves are neat, compact adventures, and they didn't take me too far off the beaten path. To continue, we're going to follow up on Dragonriding, but first, we must bury a beloved name, and reintroduce it as Skyriding. That's right, because now instead of having 5 very specific mounts, it is now effectively your entire mount journal spare a few mounts. So with Skyriding, not much has changed, outside of you can do it pretty much as soon as you enter Khazalgar, and they have utilized this flight style to truly transform the zones. Zone transition feels even better going between the layers with new slipstreams, and you feel as though you are traversing extremely long and large parts of land in almost no time. I can't really say I have any pointers for Skyriding at this point, other than to keep being an accessible option, and don't lock standard flight, or steady flight as it's called now, behind a meaningless grind. And up to this point, I don't think they've done that, so good job, War Within. So now taking a moment to once again talk about world content, I think something I'd like to see them do is not only continue the uptake on the amount of world events we have going on at once, but just making sure that they're all relevant. An issue that presented itself early on in Dragonflight was that the events were not entirely built to last, and quick grinds like the Farak Assaults or Forbidden Reach rares quickly overshadowed things like Dragonbane Keep or the Soup minigame. Make sure that while the events are plentiful, they all follow a structure similar enough that no one feels superior to the other. Besides that though, I think they're on a good pace for world events. This topic has already been beaten to death by 100 other creators, so I won't prattle on too much about it, but we have to talk about hero talents. They look amazing, they look transformative, and from my brief experience with Rider of the Apocalypse on the beta, I am absolutely in love. My hopes and wishes for this system go far beyond the War Within, but for now I'll say, I hope they take creative liberties throughout the expansion, and that they focus more on the fun aspect rather than the balancing portion. At the end of the day, things need to feel good and tuned, but no one wants to play with a bunch of passives they'll barely notice either. Have fun with it, Blizzard. Besides that though, I'm super excited. Renown in the War Within is looking to continue a very good trend that started with Dragonflight, and with the addition of account-wide Renown through warbands, the system looks to be in its best shape to date. If I had to give any kind of suggestion here, I would say to not lock any quest lines behind Renown like they did in Dragonflight, and perhaps giving better Paragon rewards at max Renown would be good. I felt very underwhelmed in Dragonflight with the Paragon rewards, and I never really felt a need to do anything past max Renown due to that. Overall though, the system looks great, and I can't wait to dive into it. Moving on now, and we're going to talk about raids. Raid is a tricky one to really make suggestions or predictions for due to the nature of the beast, but I can say for certain based on the raid testing that Nerubar Palace is looking to come in swinging. I've seen tons of unique boss mechanics, and the penultimate encounter looks to be the best council fight the game has seen to date. For suggestions here, I would say to just go against the grain as far as tuning and balancing feels, and let's try to avoid another situation like Razagath where the final encounter just seems mathematically unkillable without a plethora of nerfs. The main focus for the first tier is almost always around race to world first, so seeing them go at it is going to be exciting, and I hope that the raid pieces together nicely. I also love the introduction of Story Mode, which is a new 1 to 10 player mode that can be queued for, and allows you to have the story of the raid plus the final fight in a solo-like experience. I think this is a great thing, and I hope going forward it can be expanded into more of the raid than just one encounter. Moving right along, the upgrade system is seeing a minor change in the War Within, and it's one that feels a bit contentious. While it's remaining largely unchanged in its accessibility and ease of use for steadily gaining power, the top end is getting a bit of a shift, with the Myth track getting 2 additional upgrades. Now usually this would sound like a good thing, but crafted items are seeing no addition, and now it leaves them with a whopping 10 item levels behind. While I do applaud them for seeking ways to give players more power later into a season, it almost feels as though we are marching towards professions being left behind again, and I hope they take this into consideration and entice players towards crafted gear again before the season launches. Having top-end power is great, and this change largely affects a small portion of the player base, but it's still something I'd like to see them address beforehand, and not be an afterthought when most players are already geared. Besides that though, the upgrade system continues to be a great alternative to gearing, and I can't wait to do it again in the War Within. Diving right into the next section, we're going to talk about content cadence again. Something I'd like to see different from how Dragonflight handled things is I'd like to see less minor patches with 1 or 2 changes, and more mid-season patches with multiple additions. Having patches in Dragonflight, notably 10.2.7 and 10.1.7, largely added next to nothing for the game, and while I did always enjoy having a steady stream of content to look forward to, I do think maybe pushing back the releases by a week or 2 may have long-term impact on how the fluidity feels. Now this may seem impossible to ask of Blizzard as they make a change for expansions in their release cadence, notably going from the typical 24 months to an 18-month schedule for the Worldsoul Saga, but it is something I'd like to see them at least acknowledge or maybe just add more content in. I don't know what the perfect solution is here, and I certainly am not asking for devs to plunge more time into side content and work harder than they already are, but it's something that I felt was very rough throughout Dragonflight with the breakneck pace that they kept trying to achieve. Besides this though, keep the content coming, and I like what I see so far. And with that, we have reached the big 3 of the video. These 3 topics highlighted the bad section in the last video, and I want to go through a bit more in depth what I'd like to see the War Within do to combat the mistakes of its predecessors in these fields. These next 3 topics will be a bit more long-winded than the previous ones, and it's because I really want to feel like I'm suggesting something helpful, instead of just complaining about it for a second video in a row. So without further ado, let's dive into the first one, which is Fated Seasons. So as I said in my last breakdown, Fated Seasons are not inherently bad. Shadowlands' Fated Season came with great success and a satisfied player base yearning for something more. Dragonflight's, however, largely let people down and almost made them feel cheated out of another raid tier. We now know after confirmation through dev interviews that 4th raid tiers are a thing of the past, and we must learn to love this new Fated approach they're chasing. To that, I say fine. But if you're going to do it, you're going to have to do it by the player's rules. Simply re-releasing all the raids and the standard 8 dungeons may seem fine to a dev who just wants a refresh of content, but to players it has become largely boring, and with the removal of the raid affix in Dragonflight, it just felt boring, and nothing more than an upscaled experience made to frustrate you. If Fated Seasons are here to stay, then there are a few things you must do for them to succeed. First and foremost, you must make them interesting. It doesn't have to be affixes, it could be a dungeon pool which comprises none of the expansion's dungeons, or it could be a fresh set of affixes that the game either hasn't seen before or make a return. Think, what if they brought back Reaping in exchange for Fortified and Tyrannical? Make exciting changes that make players want to come back, but also don't force you to create something new. There is over 20 years of WoW to dig through to make an exciting throwback season, and I don't think players need a throwback for an expansion they've been playing for the last 18 to 24 months. Secondly, you have to make sure that it doesn't drag on. Now, multiple outlets have talked about the new 5-5-5-3 formula that Blizzard will be chasing, but plans don't always work out, right? Having a Fated season that lasts longer than a couple months often feels terrible, but perhaps that's by design. Blizzard has already said that Fated Season should be seen as an opportunity to get ahead, or an opportunity to also take a break from the game. While I respect this standpoint and seemingly respecting people's time, I do think that they should also be chasing a fresh season. that makes players want to play, not actively encouraging them to take a backseat while the next expansion cooks. And finally, it has to have exciting rewards and fast progression. The benefits of Fated Seasons throughout Shadowlands and Dragonflight was the breakneck pace of gear acquisition through dinars or bullions. While this has worked out in the past, I would like to see it go even further, perhaps giving players more currency sooner or dropping additional crests as the weeks go on. If someone jumps into a Fated Season towards the end to prepare for the next expansion, they shouldn't have to feel like they're playing catch-up in a catch-up season. Catch my drift? I think making sure that all players, regardless of when they're starting the season, feel powerful and fast throughout the entire process is critical to the success of these fun seasons. And that's all I really have for Fated Season suggestions, and I really hope going into the War Within we don't just see another rehash of 8 dungeons and 3 raids, because it'll feel really dull. Speaking of personal experience, my guild played Season 4 on a raid log basis to obtain our beautiful owl mounts, and then quickly moved on, and just anticipated War Within while playing other games. If Fated Seasons are destined to be something that stays in the game, they must find ways to be different while also not being boring. And that's all I've got for Fated. Now let's move on to Dungeons. Dungeons. What before an expansion looked so exhilarating and unique, very quickly turned to despair and disappointment just months into a season. There were many reasons for this, usually because in the modern era of WoW, dungeons are designed front to back to be speedran by the best of the best in a linear fashion that is all too boring for most players. Or simply because over time the prospect of running a dungeon hundreds of times wears on you. I have a few suggestions for what can alleviate this, but before I do want to applaud Blizzard for what they are doing. Throwing away the traditional affix system in favor of a sort of hybrid affix approach is interesting, and I'm very much looking forward to trying it out. For those who don't know about it, seasonal affixes are making a return in Season 1 in the form of Xal'atath's Bargain. This is an affix that starts from key levels 2 all the way through 11, with the affix changing every week in sort of a rotating seasonal affix. It sounds great, and paired with the combination of Fortified, Tyrannical, and a punishing new affix that takes away an extra 10 seconds per death, Season 1 of War Within is looking to have the most unique difficulty since Mythic Plus was introduced back in Legion. Now, let's get on to what I think they could do to improve. First off, I just want to say the elephant in the room. Don't be afraid to say hello to the original trilogy. Yes, we have heard time and time again that original WoW dungeons weren't made for Mythic Plus. But what I think Blizzard needs to start realizing is that may be the key to their success. Maybe the key to shaking up dungeon pools in these newer expansions is to take dungeons that were never supposed to be ran this way and forcing players to find a way to do it. Imagine starting a season and immediately you must find a way to do the Nexus on Mythic Plus. It's a branching dungeon with many paths, but only through experimentation can you find the best one. I would much prefer this in favor of something like Ruby Life Pools, where no matter how hard you try, there is absolutely no way to go the wrong way. Making dungeons interesting and complex not only adds another level of difficulty to it, but it also gives players creative freedoms to find new ways to solve the problem of the timer, and it would make seasons feel fresher with how many new routes are found throughout a season. Next, it's time to say goodbye to Fortified and Tyrannical. This may sound hypocritical, as I was just praising them for their work in Season 1 with these two affixes, but the truth is the truth. These affixes are the only ones to survive the test of time since the dawn of Mythic Plus, and the truth of the matter is that Blizzard needs to move beyond them. Whether it be a new set of permanent affixes or a redesign of the affix system as a whole, this has done nothing but serve as a frustrating rotational system that has plagued players since the start, and finding a new way to utilize week-to-week balance would be extremely beneficial to not only players, but developers alike. Also, we need to move on to the big one. Reward those who go beyond the expectation. Again, something that has been set in stone since the dawn of the system itself, it is all too standard now to get your mount and your hero title and move on. For those who go beyond the brink and push that 0.1%, they are rewarded with nothing more than a title to their name. Now, I don't PvP myself, but I imagine they share much of the same frustrations in this regard. Imagine sinking thousands of extra hours into a system, and your reward at the end of it is just something next to your name that's going to be replaced in a few months for the same reason. Blizzard needs to find a way to make this more exciting and make people want to obtain it. While some may call it an unfair advantage, I see an easy solution to this. You must award the players who go beyond a certain key level with unique gear drops, something that you must have to really work to obtain. In the current system, the only way to obtain myth gear is to complete a 10 and obtain it from your weekly Great Vault. To encourage people to go beyond the brink, I think it'd be a great idea to award 1 out of 6 myth gear to those who pursue a plus 15, or maybe even a plus 20. Giving players reasons to continuously push the marker is a good thing, and it keeps players wanting more. While player power may not be the best way to do things, this is just a suggestion that I thought may be useful. And now we have made it to the big one, the Big Three's finale. It is no secret to anyone that WoW's story has struggled in recent years. N'Zoth, the Jailer, the Dragon aspects, they all seem to fall flat in some regard or another. Now, I'm no lore master, and I'm certainly not Noble, but I will say that something has to change. In recent years, Blizzard has taken to heart that stories should be shown in-game and not in books or short stories, but I still feel that they have a ways to go. There are certain facts about characters that I didn't know because I didn't read a random short story that Blizzard posted years ago. Not counting those, though, the main story of War Within has to succeed where the others have failed. It has to be coherent, it has to be interesting, and probably most importantly, it has to make sense. The War Within sets the stage for Anduin's big return after his battle with Domination in the Shadowlands, and I'm pretty sure no one is going to be okay with him crying for half the expansion. Anduin is a strong character, and has had solid mental fibers dating back since Mists of Pandaria, when he first defied his father's wishes in search of answers. We need to see this strong Anduin return to the stage, and we need to see him quickly regain control of his light and use it to become the leader he once was and lead the charge against Xal'atath. Up to now, it seems like Illyria is going to be the main factor in this fight, but at the same time, it kind of feels like her place fits more with Midnight, and I'm hoping we are leading to a clever diversion from Blizzard in this regard. Xal'atath is not a threat for the War Within, she is a threat in the Worldsoul Saga, and I hope Blizzard keeps this in mind when making their decisions over the next several years. These characters must stand the test of time and go beyond what we think they are capable of, and in the case of main campaign characters, Anduin needs to become the king that everyone knew he could be back in Mists of Pandaria. As for other characters, they all need work in some regard. It's no secret to anyone that the War Within showcases a heavy emphasis on Alliance characters. And while Blizzard has openly suggested that there is more than meets the eye, we have to see it sooner rather than later. Thrall's presence should serve only as a reminder of his lost power, and similar to Anduin's journey to becoming who he once was, Thrall must do the same and become the green Jesus we all remember him to be. Jaina's entry in the series seems largely misguided so far, as far as I could tell, she seems like a last-minute addition with no real substance. I hope this changes over time and she gets a more significant role, but as it stands currently, I would have much rather seen Bane or Kalia Menethil in the role, bolstering their diminished character lores. I know I focused on the protagonist a bit, but that's largely because I think Blizzard is already surpassing expectations with the villain. Xal'atath is a villain that has slowly built up since Legion during the Shadow Priest questline, and seeing her take center stage in this mental conflict across the ages is exhilarating. All the teases and pokes that Blizzard is doing to rile players up is working, and I hope they tread carefully when deciding how to ultimately deal with her as a villain. This should not be a villain that goes down quietly, and her fight should be reminiscent of some of the greatest encounters in WoW history. I think of Arthas and Garrosh. Xal'atath is leading up to be a hell of a villain, and I cannot wait to see the emotional turmoil continue to stockpile throughout the Worldsoul Saga as we march against her and her forces. So that's all I have for this video. I know it's called a Prospective, but I tried to add a bit of my own takes in there as well, and I hope that didn't ruin the video too much. Some of these answers I obtained from prior alpha-beta knowledge, but most remains largely a mystery. As we march towards the War Within now being less than a month away, my next few videos are going to be gameplay focused, making sure that you all know how to effectively use your time when the expansion launches, and some things you may have forgot to do while waiting for the expansion. Until next time though, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I'll catch you later. See ya!